This is the office, just up the road. The story of the monastery itself, whilst I'm not here to talk about that this afternoon, is pretty much an inspirational thing. Pugin designed, built through the 1860s. The church withdrew in the late 80s and we almost lost it. Some of the pictures that you saw there, roof off, open to the elements. If it had gone another winter, we were told that it wouldn't have been restorable within the budgets that were available. And that's what it looks like today. If you're at all interested and you've not been up there, do get in touch. We'd love to see you. That's what it looks like today. That's, in fact, I tell a lie, it's not. It's on the top here. Just earlier this year we had the return of the saints that stand on tops of the plinths. It's a magnificent space. The picture doesn't do it justice. Walking into the great nave is non-religious but a spiritual experience. It really does demonstrate the power of architecture to influence the human spirit. For those non-Mancunians present, Gorton is, by anyone's economic yardstick, a challenged area. One of the poorer parts of the city, in economic terms, traditional economic terms anyway, it was once actually a thriving industrial area. Difficult, well, maybe it's not difficult to believe because we've still got some of the the legacy buildings around the place. I can tell by the puzzled looks that there was nothing going on behind it. So, anyone heard of Bay of Peacock? The Manx here will have heard of Bay of Peacock. Over 632 engines rumbled out of Bay of Peacock before it closed down. That's a view quickly disappearing. The yellow ring was the monastery. But it wasn't all heavy industry, heavy engineering. In the late 60s through to 2000, I think it was, ICL, the UK's computer manufacturer, who I used to work for a little while, were resident in Gorton, in a large tower and factory complex, and they made computers, very large computers. But in many ways, the withdrawal of the Catholic Church, because industry was closing down, the church withdrew from the monastery, and it became a symbol of what was happening outside of its doors. So the church went into decay and decline, as did the community. Actually, if you talk to some of the people who were whippersnappers at the time, they will tell you that there was nothing more effective as a neighbourhood watch than a monk wandering around during the early hours of the morning. I've tried to summarise what I think, so this is very much a personal view this afternoon, in terms of the overall purpose of the monastery today. We want to secure a future for our past, so there's still an awful amount of effort put into having the monastery perform as a venue in order to generate the income to do other stuff that we find, I have to say personally, rather more interesting. And part of that interesting stuff is, you know how monasteries were a sanctuary of old? We want the monastery to be a sanctuary for ideas. So whether you're public, private or third sector, whatever you're wrestling with, we'd like to have the ability to influence the conversation, to have the conversation, to have the thinking done in a safe place, still with a very, very keen eye on making a difference in our communities. In looking at the purpose of today, I've taken a bit of a liberty in that whilst I am talking about a project that's in view, I'm using that more, I guess, more the way a drunk uses a lamppost, more for support than illumination, and I'm going to leverage off that and bring forward some lessons, thankfully, a lot of which have already been mentioned through the day. But Box Farm is part of a growing Gorton focus. Why Box Farm? You know, we've got far more expert people in the room today and in the world at large on growing things inside containers? Well, context. Del mentioned this morning that context is really important. Context's a key thing. What does urban farming look like in a Gorton context? Do we have a conversation with the City Council about easing planning restrictions, making access to wasteland available more readily? But we want to explore different economic models. We also want to find out why the economic models that prove the, I'll use the word success, of that kind of agriculture. Why, I think, well, is Jules still in the room? No, she's gone. I'm told that the payback now on a container-based box farm is less than a year. So why aren't they springing up all over the place? There's got to be something getting in the way. So we want to look at why traditional economic models aren't working. We want to look at flexing it, dare I say, thinking outside the box, Rome, and looking at how you might build box farm into communities. In fact, even building communities from box farms. Thank you, Uncle Bill. A bit more context. This is the backdrop from which I'm going to leverage the lessons that I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. Because context changes, you probably tell I'm not from Manchester. I'm actually from Sunderland. I currently live in West Yorkshire, so yes, I do have challenges. My context changed last weekend. I was 9 before I realised that my local football team wasn't called Sunderland Nil. Going into the office was not a problem until last weekend when we became Sunderland 1. Manchester City did. So context changes. This context will change. That's what it happens to be at the moment. So we've got box farm in here as a project. I'm particularly interested in transitionability. A lot of today for me has been musing about the difference between what Peter Cavillette from the University of Manchester wrote as Model 1 economy to Model 2. Model 1 is the economic world that we've come from, pre-crash. Model 2 is the future. Model 2 is still a bit fuzzy. Despite people's best efforts, it's still a bit, how do we get there? So transition, and more beyond that, transitionability, the capacity for transition is something that gets me very, very agitated. So I'm doing a lot of work with industry and with schools. So transitionability applies to them just as anywhere else on what that looks like. How do you measure capacity for transition? How do you make it happen? And we've got a management consulting industry that's packaged up change management. We move from point A to point B. There's a prescribed way of doing that, but change is about people. And it's not from point to point, put the manual back on the shelf and start over next time we need to change. Resilience has been mentioned. Resilience is absolutely one of the measures for me of transitionability. So what does that mean? Anyway, I could go on for far too long on that, but if anyone wants to talk about transitionability, I'm your man. Right, lessons learned. Don't try and do everything yourself. This is probably one of the pitfalls that I see most in the third sector, the voluntary sector, and indeed in micro and small business environments. And it's an understandable pitfall, but avoid it. If I use the word extended enterprise, is everyone okay with that phrase? It's the connection of organisations that you actively bring together to make something happen. So put your discretionary effort into building the right extended enterprise as opposed to trying to do everything yourself. Advocacy. I use the word consistently evangelise. If you're going to advocate change, advocate transition, got to get the language right. Got to be consistent with the language. Great, where's Vince gone? Has he run away? Back to the biosphere. Language, sustainability. We probably get 26 different definitions around the room. It's really, really important. And on a whimsical and slightly mischievous note, wouldn't it be great if we had the University of Manchester introducing a Masters in Business Innovation rather than a Masters in Business Administration? It says different things. In fact, I don't know, you've probably seen the news that Manchester students have now formed a post-crash economic society, calling for a change in the curriculum, that neoclassical economics is no longer the thing to be teaching. Isn't it great that Manchester, as has already been said, started the Industrial Revolution? It's now where the students are calling for a different kind of economics. And if we are decommissioning the industrial society, isn't it appropriate that Manchester's doing it? And this basically means don't be afraid of picking up a good idea and using it. Not invented here syndrome gets in the way far too often. The other health warning, again, I think Del, or certainly a colleague from Enfield mentioned this morning, context. Don't try and take what works over there and bring it wholesale over here. Localise it, contextualise it. There are, whether you think it's herding cats or giving something away, form an orderly queue to get this next great idea. Look at different models. Push yourself to look at what models could we use for scaling, rather than here's how it works over there, or this is the way it must work. This can be challenging. It was great to hear that Enfield have already started to do a bit of this. You can read that, I hope. Social impact bonds? Yes, no, heard of? Yeah, if you don't know what they are, look and see who nodded and go and talk to them afterwards. Just one example of an alternative funding mechanism. But it works in the same way that a merchant bank connects capital with enterprise. We need the equivalent of a merchant bank for local stroke social enterprise. Someone who basically is there as the credible, authoritative voice that says, if you want to put that capital into that reoffending programme, yours is the organisation that you should go to. At the moment, if you're looking for funding for reoffending reduction, you have to do the shopping around and convincing people with the capital. That's hard. So my wanted list is for local authorities, dare I say, because they do a lot of commissioning of services, so they know the territory. But if it's not a local authority, it needs to be something. I do have to hold my hands up at this point. I spent several years working in the City of London, and I find it really frustrating that a number of ex-colleagues, but still working down there, are talking about what they need to do to get back to business as usual. We've got far too many people stuck in different old ways of measuring things, and maybe we need to send a coachload of Manchester students down to launch the post-crash economic disciplines down there. But it's not just about economics, it's about any kind of success measures. Be very, very careful what you set as your criteria, because that's what you'll get. This is one of my favourite Native American sayings. And that's, apart from the whimsy, there are 2 points in here really. One is, be really sure when you need to leap and then leap. But be conscious that if you want people to be on the same side of the chasm with you, you might need to build a bridge. And there are a lot of people that we're expecting to have their attitudes changed. We need to build some bridges for them, because they ain't going to leap on their own. And I thought it would be topical to finish with the thoughts of a Bernstein. For the Mancunians, this is Leonard, not Howard. And I've certainly found that to be true. Whenever you're trying to do something, it doesn't even have to be great, does it? You can have a plan and then you realise you've not got enough time. Thank you.